Welcome to the Global Investor Podcast. The goal of this podcast is to offer investors and entrepreneurs insights and practical advice to dramatically improve the kinds of deals they invest in and the returns they get. My name is James Evenson. I'm one of the partners at Crown Private. If you are unfamiliar with Obris by Crown Private, we are a membership syndicate of investors. We are about exceptional people, unique experiences, and bespoke investment. Our membership is built up of like-minded yet unique and adventurous individuals and family offices. We invest in a spectrum of deals from established companies to startups. We do so with a proven formula of due diligence, structuring, and management. This July, we're hosting an event for seasoned investors in Panama City, Panama. In addition to touring the local scene and seeing firsthand the kind of business that can be done in Panama, we will cover a broad range of topics from investing in Panama, residency, tax and incorporation there, as well as improving our prowess as global investors, and much, much more. If that's something that is of interest to you, please visit obrisinvest.com for more details. That is OBRIS invest.com. In this podcast, I will interview Aly Moore. Aly is a co-founder of Entopian Capital. Entopian is the first large-scale VC that seeks to identify the winners in the insect industry. Yes, I said insects. Insects as food for human consumption, as well as food for animals. This is a growing early-stage industry. Entopian Capital was formed to identify the best and most likely to succeed. After studying public health at Yale University, Aly searched for a way to address the challenges to nutritiously feed our growing world population. She started Bugible.com as a blog to support the growing insect agricultural industry, and she slowly grew a cult following on Instagram. To reach a broader audience, Aly created Eat Bugs events, which, as it sounds, promotes insects as food through bug and wine pairings, bug dinners, and bug cooking classes. Aly and the Entopian team will be joining us at the Obris Panama event, where in addition to pitching Entopian VC, they will be officially launching Entopian, and Aly will be treating us to a bug and wine pairing. All right, so welcome, Aly. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first question, where are you this day? Where do we find you?
So right now I am in Los Angeles, California, where I'm born and raised and have returned to do everything from tech to bugs.
Excellent. Well, so I gave our listeners a brief bio on you from your the time you graduated from Yale up to the starting point of Entopian, and I'd love it if you could tell us, fill in the big question for me is, why bugs? What led you to the involvement in the insect industry, and then how did you get to where you are now with a fund?
Yeah, so the bug origin story is always hilarious, I think, for anyone in the industry. For me personally, I studied public health while I was at university, and we had one of those summers abroad where we were doing health clinics in Mexico. And at that point, I was just getting a taco at a late night taco stand, and they had all sorts like lengua and chapulines, which are grasshoppers. So those were absolutely delicious, and I ended up returning home and asking around to see where I could buy edible insects to prank my family for an upcoming Thanksgiving. So that was the start of it. Totally not pure intentions. But at that point, it was pre-2013 when a white paper came out that changed a lot in the States for the insect agriculture space. And I had to kind of figure out things for myself by calling up cricket farms and learning about the world. Fell in love with just how strange but potentially good it could be and started blogging about it. And that was way back in 2012. So since then, it's just been going down the rabbit hole, keeping Bugible from a blog to an events site to more of a general brand ambassadorship and consulting clinic for insect companies that want to learn how to tell their stories. And about a year ago, it became my full-time job. So the fund came in.
All right.
Pardon?
No, that's great. Keep going.
Okay, it's an earful. I'll make it into little sound bites though. But the fund was very serendipitous in all the right ways. I think at that stage, this was October 2018, and I have been a couple months into figuring out what it means to do Bugible full time. You know, all that recurring revenue streams and making it a business and not just a hobby. So at that point, a man named Josh Galt, who I've known for some time through the internet and the bug community. He's like my brand, but for across the pond over in Asia and Europe, and runs a site called Ento Vegan. And he happened to be in Budapest pitching, I believe, your community about edible insects.
That is correct.
And I think he saw on my Instagram story that I was going to be landing in Budapest. So he messaged me and was like, you know, can you make it over to hang out with me and talk about bugs to some people that might be interested? And went straight from the airplane, met you guys at breakfast, talked a little bit about bugs, heard some hesitation and saw some raised eyebrows, but we were just excited about the fact that there was interest and that, you know, there was enough curiosity to merit us diving in and seeing what it actually would take to create a fund, drafting up a thesis, and kind of validating product market fit. So talking to all the companies and figuring out what are their actual needs and like, is this the perfect time? And it turned out it was.
Wow. Well, I think that's perfect. I did not realize that was when you and Josh had met up. I do recall that when Josh presented at our event in Budapest, yes, there were raised eyebrows. I think there were two sets of raised eyebrows. One was bugs, really, and two was he was focused on a company, not a fund. So we've come a long way in a short period of time. I'm pleased to know that you all where you've gone from there to this point in time. But let's move forward. I think that we need to dig into exactly what we're talking about. What bugs, what kind of insects, and what are the markets for insects today and going forward?
Yeah, so I'll clarify a little bit about Josh and my meeting up as well. It wasn't like the first time we ever met and then suddenly we're going to do a fund. Like, we'd known each other for a couple of years online, and we hung out at the conferences that the bug people have and all that. But very quickly now Josh is like, you know, on the regular, we'll talk every day almost. And that has been super cool. You know, that if you asked me a year ago what I would be doing today in this space, this would be at the top of the list. But as more of a dream. So now we're doing it. But insect agriculture, or sometimes better called insects for food and feed, it's a pretty broad space, and a lot of folks don't really think about all the ways that insects can play a role in the food system. I think the media has had a fun time covering some of the more scandalous sides of the industry, where you have cricket protein bars or chips with crickets, and you'll have plates with tarantulas that have been deep fried and are being served up, because that's all very good newsworthy material. But while 2 billion people in the world already eat bugs, we are definitely a little ways off in the States still and have some work to do. Thankfully for the industry, there are other verticals that are already doing quite well. Crickets for insects, or crickets for pets, for example, just snakes and reptiles of all sorts, is already over $1 billion industry in the States. And just recently, I believe February of this year, 2019, regulation that was completely outdated has been updated to permit for certain types of black soldier fly larvae and mealworms to be used in feed for fish and for chickens. And when you think about that, it's kind of funny in a way, because chickens and fish eat bugs in the wild, but outdated regulation from the mad cow era and continued incentives from soy subsidies and corn subsidies have kept regulation like that in place in different regions of the world. So now that we're seeing these changes, there's a lot of room for companies to expand, and the name of the game will be scaling quickly, but also methodically and not recklessly.
Mm-hmm. How quickly do you think this is going to scale?
So I think that industry-wide, it'll scale. We're at the bell curve right now. We are ramping up the elbow for in startup world, but I think we're going to see the industry as a whole scale up, and so the different verticals won't be going more quickly than research and demand can keep up, which is a great thing. In addition to food and feed, there's the supply chain, there's the farming technology, automation. We're the biggest cost for crickets right now, which could be the most cost-effective way to get nutrition. It's not yet. It's still Whole Foods priced, but it's still all very, very manual. And so as we get automation and typical farming advancements, we'll see a lot of changes. We need things like the veterinary sciences for insects to be worked on, which is a funny thought, but making sure they don't get wiped out by cricket disease. And we have a lot of extra value in companies that's not being captured, but people are aware of it. They're just early pioneers and super small teams that don't have time to think about how to most effectively extract the oil from black soldier fly larvae, and then who will be the best buyer in the value chain for something that's pretty great for cosmetics or pharma or whatnot. We already know that mealworm poop is really, really great for a lot of fertilizers, and it's called frass, and there's some connections there to the cannabis industry since it seems to be ideal for that type of growing. But there's just a lot of room for growth holistically across the industry and individually within each vertical too.
Gotcha. You've addressed a few or listed a few different verticals. Can you give us some examples of types of companies that are in this space that are appealing at this point in time?
Yeah, so I think the immediately obvious ones are the CPG brands, and we're seeing some interesting movement there too. So Purina, for example, recently launched, also I think around January of 2019, some dog food with crickets included, and that was pretty cool to see. So we're seeing big players get involved. We have the more typical CPG brands like Chirps Chips and Chapul protein bars that are actually Mark Cuban companies, and they've been doing pretty well. You can even get the chips.
What is CPG?
Consumer goods products. So anything like chips, protein bars, snacks, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you referenced Purina, so for pet food, and then for consumables for humans as well.
Exactly. So that's one pretty well-defined space. Okay. The other would be feed. So the EU is a little bit ahead of the rest of the world in terms of clearly defining regulations. And as such, their insects for feed companies are a year or two ahead as well. There's a company called Y Insect, and it actually broke records for all of agritech this year by raising about $125 million for their Series C. And what they do is just have a small inclusion rate of their insects into the trout industry. So that's pretty cool. Companies like that are really, I believe that the feed is one of the more obvious spaces that's going to accelerate pretty quickly from here on out. The other examples are some great companies that are working on that automation technology. So when you think about agriculture, we've had thousands of years to figure out the best way to milk a cow and all that good stuff. I mean, the best for productivity, maybe not for ethics, but we can get to that later. For insects, there's some teams that are focusing on just upgrading equipment, scaling production, and coming up with ways to, what temperature best incubates these cricket eggs, what diet best creates a nutrition profile that's appealing for different types of products, all of these things. So it's pretty, there's just so many opportunities given the stage that the industry is at. We're getting really bright minds in right now. And as we get more outside expertise into this space, it's incredibly exciting to see. We're getting big players that are coming in now instead of just your typical pioneer who is passionate about the strange and wants to become an entrepreneur. So that shift will be incredible to see.
Okay, so back in September when we were speaking with Josh, the idea was an insect-related company. Now you have launched a fund, and tell us why a fund versus a company.
Yeah, so I think a lot of my friends have been asking me that too, which is a fun question. I think for both Josh and I, as subject matter experts and players in the space, the expectation would be just use the knowledge we've gained to create a brand or to identify the most lucrative vertical and expand in that space. But what we have found in our years has been that there's so much value to capture. It would almost be a missed opportunity to focus in on one space. And it could not be better timing. We're at a point where the insect industry today is nascent, undercapitalized. Most companies are 10 years in development and only recently entering into a big commercialization phase. The cost of capital is pretty high because in-house expertise is needed to properly evaluate and source opportunities. I know when venture capitalists say they have proprietary deal flow, that doesn't mean much after the advent of the internet, but in this case, it actually does, given the just massively scattered and pretty quiet nature of a lot of these companies. Most of the challenges that the space is facing right now, like public market education, infant technology, lack of scaling precedents, and then still pretty unsophisticated supply chain. Those are all being worked on and have been worked on for a while, and we're seeing inflection points in those. And most of the challenges can also be solved with capital and strategic advisor expertise and some consolidations, so vertical or horizontal within the industry. And that's the one that I'm most excited about. We've seen one acquisition occur already where the biggest farm in the US, Aspire, out of Austin, Texas, purchased a CPG brand. And we expect that within our portfolio, we will see a lot of vertical or horizontal consolidations to broaden distribution or cut costs and standardize and control inputs, which will lead to, we will select who we think will be category leaders, and then we'll solidify those spots by providing them with not just capital, but shared resources to give them an edge that will be pretty significant.
Gotcha. So you have actually described a very broad industry. It's ironic because in my mind it seemed rather small, but it is clear that the world is blowing up with crickets and other insects as a food source. Within this large industry, what criteria have you and your team identified that will define what types of companies the fund invests in?
Yeah. And I like that you point that out as well. We're working on an FAQ sheet because we've been getting pretty consistent early questions from folks once they hear bug fund. And the top question is, isn't that a little bit narrow? Is there enough room for, proper ranking of deals? And our response is, it might be too broad. We have in our mandate flexibility to invest in a variety of industry companies and different verticals, but at the end of the day, this space is absolutely massive and will play into a lot. The future of food is big. The future of farming tech is big. Insects can play a role at pretty much every level of that. We haven't even talked about nutrient upcycling or waste management yet, but it's broad. And in order to properly evaluate them, that requires a lot of insight into cricket farming, mealworm farming, black soldier fly larvae, and also just the general industry as a whole and the relationships and dynamics between different companies and, between companies and other growing agricultural industries at large. So what we've done is we have a pretty awesome team where we have the financial expertise coming in from Marvin and Crown Financial. We have Josh and myself who have over 6 years each of relationships with a lot of companies in the space, and also pretty neutral positions in the industry. And so we're able to hear input and insight from a variety of companies and teams and get a pretty good pulse in the industry. We've also brought on as our informal advisors Kevin Bugible, Jeff Tomberlin, Michael Locasio, and Arnold Van Huys. Bugible, Tomberlin, and Van Huys are the foremost fathers of the industry. Kevin Bugible actually created the US's first FDA-inspected human-grade cricket farm. So he was the one that marched in and said, we actually need certification protocol for this, because if we have crickets that are human grade, not just pet grade, they need a way to get that stamp. Jeff Tomberlin is the leading world expert in black soldier fly research. He co-authored the industry standard guide for insect farming, and Van Huys actually wrote the report that I mentioned earlier that came out in 2013 with the FAO and the UN that said by 2050 we'll have 9.5 billion people on the planet. We need a better, more sustainable way to nutritiously feed them. Of course, they didn't say bugs were the only solution. They said it's part of it, but media loved that headline. But as the man really behind that, he works at Wageningen University, which I can't pronounce properly, and I'm so sorry for that, but in the Netherlands, and is brilliant. So together with them and our outside advisor from BASF, which is a large chemical company, we put together a checklist that I believe is pretty unique, that contains every single red flag, every single indicator for success, takes input from Kevin's consulting over the years with a variety of farms, and will help us properly identify, at the very least, we know what the farms need to be successful. And after a company passes through that evaluation criteria, it comes down to just how is the management team, who are these people running it, and pretty standard stuff.
Oh. Yeah, so your team is actually well equipped to oversee that, basically for everything you'd said to me from start to finish. Well, I appreciate hearing that, and I think our listeners will as well, because you've stepped into something that is quite new in many regards, and it's the world is your oyster for how you choose what companies you invest in. So I certainly appreciate, as an investor, I appreciate that you have established your criteria and, like you said, your checklist. I think it's more than a checklist of what will qualify or disqualify companies. And this is early in the existence of the fund, so I'm sure that will continue to develop further. Aly, tell us what can you and what can the insect industry learn from some other more recent new starts? Cannabis is the one that comes to mind first, and then also solar as a second one. We've seen solar rise and fall, and cannabis is still rising. What are you learning from those industries that will be beneficial to you all?
Absolutely. Pardon me. So we dabble in kind of how to frame the narrative around cannabis in particular, because for some people, it's a light bulb moment, like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we missed the boat on cannabis, and it's a pretty similar industry story where there's a lot of companies that aren't immediately obvious to the public. It's pretty clear the space is going to expand, but there's some gray zones and regulation, and there's early investment, but by celebrity or people who somehow have a connection to the space, leaving others a little bit out of the loop until it becomes more mainstream. But at that point, the cost of capital is a little bit lower and the opportunity size smaller. It does a great job of helping illustrate what the future of this space can look like in terms of opportunity. But thankfully, bugs are a little bit less contested, I think, in terms of are they good for the people or not. Solar is also great in terms of mapping out how we can mitigate risk in the industry. I think on the whole, we have a couple main takeaways. One is you want to mitigate feed volatility for farmers, and anything that is volatile that is a critical input for your industry. That can sink some companies or certain verticals. So we've noticed that we have feed price volatility for the substrate that some of the bugs are being fed. If we can lock that in, which we will through the sophistication of the supply chain, whether it's kind of commoditized or standardized in another way, whether it's through a merger or an acquisition, that's a big one. It's pretty low-hanging fruit. We want to make sure that we have alternative financing available to companies, especially those in our portfolio, but in the industry at large. We need to finance for the long term. So we'll need a hybrid financing available, project-based sometimes. And we have partners that are willing to come in at that level. And so we're excited about that. So let's see. We also think that a big one is going to be workplace safety and automation. So if we can make sure that we have just the basics nailed down, we lock in prices of inputs, we have hybrid financing available, we have things like workplace safety and automation top of mind. We are checking the boxes on a lot of seemingly obvious but vertical jeopardizing things.
Very well stated. All right, super, Aly. Thank you very much. So you've got the fund established. You have partners in place. You are in the raising of the fund. You've given some good confidence to your investors and partners thus far that you and your team really have a good handle on how to create this new enter into this new market, but to create something new with a fund. Tell us about the challenges that you see yourselves facing in this new and emerging market.
Yeah, so thank you, by the way, as well. It's been incredibly exciting to slowly kind of lift the veil and begin reaching out more and more to potential LPs now and getting through the setup period. The response has been overwhelmingly positive, and I expect that trend to continue. I did not know how open people would be or how much they knew already about the space, so that's great. I think a lot of the challenges are they're unavoidable, but they're things that are not to be too happy camper about it, but they're really opportunities. There's definitely many gray zones that exist in regulation still. That will be a complexity that will need the support of trade organizations and a lot of existing advocates in the space to just navigate through. We have the complexity also in our fund of being global, which we've thought about, why not do North America or Asia? But the industry is just so global in nature, and there's a lot of crossover that can just be super beneficial. While cricket farming is new in the States in the manner that we're pursuing it, it's been done for thousands of years in Asia in certain regions, and there are techniques that are wonderful, and we're not communicating as much as we could. So we're gonna force our companies to play nice, not force. They're excited for this. But I think that the complexities of a lot of that, the global nature of the regulatory gray zones, and just like the infant stage, those are going to be the major challenges. I think the other thing we have to be very careful about is this industry in particular is so sensitive to brand messaging and narrative that we will need to be hyper diligent about steering that narrative throughout our entire process. From just a Bugible standpoint, something that our industry has been concerned with. I sit on our North American organization's media team, and we are constantly discussing, what is our crisis control plan? What happens if somebody tries to have a cockroach eating competition and chokes on a live cockroach, which happened, I think 10 years ago. Pre this space, outside of it, something super dumb, the guy died, and people will still bring that up and ask it. And it's like, if you're gonna try to eat live cockroaches as quickly as you can, one, we would never ask you to do that, and two, that's just dumb. So we're gonna have to make sure that we avoid anything at all, though, that could be considered scandalous in the space because food is emotional, food systems are complex, and anything related to insects has the potential to fall into the phobic category. And so we just need to be very, very diligent about who we're associating with, how we're telling this story, all of those good things.
When did you start Bugible?
Bugible was a blog from 2012 to 2015. Yeah.
Okay, so you personally, Aly, have been addressing the raised eyebrows and the concerns and cautions and the fears for 9 years now?
Gosh, has it been that long? Yeah. I mean, I think around 7, and
7 years. Sorry, 7 years. My
like,
math was
whoa.
off.
Yeah. So it's been fun to even see the evolution of my own community, though. My friends have no hesitation grabbing a bag of mealworms and sitting down in front of a Netflix show.
Right. So what about a more general audience? How are you seeing people switch from raised eyebrows to bright eyes and seeing the potential? And I'd like you to respond to that from two angles. One would be industry-wise, and then two, consumer-wise, for someone who might be eating bugs.
Yeah. So I think, one, this is my favorite topic. I think it's just a really fun marketing case study. We know that consumer preferences can change, and there are different, I call them magic words for different people. And on this applies, I think, to both industry and consumer. Some people make decisions based on logic, and if you take them down the typical why eat bugs path, well, they're sustainable, nutritious, and can be delicious if you know what you're doing. The facts are pretty astounding, where it varies a lot depending on how you raise livestock, of course, but somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 gallons of water are needed per pound of beef. Now, around 1 gallon of water is needed per pound of crickets. They take less space. They're cold-blooded, so their feed to body mass conversion ratio is much better. They're just more efficient as a whole, release less greenhouse gases, are very easy to put into vertical farms. They could be the future of space food. What do you think the first thing we eat on Mars is going to be? It's not going to be a cow. It's going to probably be, cricket. And those points work for some. Others are very interested in the nutrition potential and beyond protein, just how dense these critters are, from the omega-3s to magnesium, calcium, potassium, tons of B12. So that bodes very well too. On a social entrepreneurship side, there's lots of projects going on that we don't even discuss that much within the context of the fund, because we want to appear focused as we are on the finances, but this can do a lot of good. And big companies we're seeing really do care about that, as we're seeing more pressure from consumers on having an ethical, transparent supply chain, and to promote things like farming with integrity. And premium might not just mean premium taste-wise for your food, but it might mean premium in terms of its impact on the environment as well as your body. So these are all things that do wonders. And then just in general, it's just about creating fun opportunities. People are still very heavily influenced by peer pressure. So that's why I do things like bug and wine pairings or bug dinners, which started off gimmicky, but are truly a wonderful way to get people out of their comfort zone. And I have never pressured anyone, but I have yet to meet somebody that I can't convert. And even the plus ones, when I have a room full of people, I know who the plus ones are. They are not making eye contact. They have their phones out and they just want an Instagram picture. But after they see everyone not dying and kind of biting into their first whatever bug, and it's often quite a familiar flavor, they want in. And once you try it, it becomes a situation where you're filled with more excited curiosity than nervous anxiety.
Well, I appreciate that you have taken something that you're passionate about and identified that it's not just valuable for Aly, but it's actually valuable to the world. And that it's something that you have teamed up with others to promote. And also you've given an opportunity to investors to be able to participate in this really a new wave, and one that is quite timely. Before we wrap up, I would actually like you to delve in a little bit further on the bugs and foods, bugs and wine. So maybe share what is your favorite recipe from the past month first, and then tell us about when you're doing bug and wine pairings. That's one that I need to get my mind around.
So wearing the Bugible hat again now, bug and wine pairings in particular have just been so much fun. I think that it, like everything else, started off as a gimmick, started off as something that was just meant to be, how can I get my mom to try bugs? And she is my perfect example of a demographic that hypothetically would support this, but just cannot emotionally get around the bug. So liquid courage goes a long way. I called up a couple wine bars in Los Angeles with this idea. I wanted to do some filming with some YouTubers to kind of put out a piece of content, and was turned down by every place except for one called V Wine Room in West Hollywood, and it was because the owner misheard me. And so when I walked into his bar with a bunch of bugs, he was a little surprised, and his name is Mikey, and that was 3 years ago, and we've been working together ever since, hosting tons of events, because he, just like everyone else, he has that light bulb moment. He's like, wow, okay, this actually is an untapped, culinary opportunity where you have those chefs. They're looking for the next big flavor edge. Maybe it's that secret locally sourced blueberry that grows somewhere, but maybe it's bugs, and there's a treasure trove of flavors that have been unexplored. And you have the nutty umami crickets, and you have the slightly fishy, nothing offensive, but kind of like a salmon jerky feel to a scorpion. And then you have black ants, which are totally naturally peppery lemon flavored, and it's because of the formic acid in their defense systems. So this variety of incredible flavors that you can bring out a little bit more and get people to put on their food critic hat instead of their, oh my gosh, I'm eating bugs hat, that works wonders. So with that though, everything that we're doing, we're trying to have an application for it. So in this case, we are cataloging all of the flavors and using the palettes of sommeliers and others to best define what insects taste like so that they can be used by chefs. Chefs are more likely to consider something for their menu if they have a little guidebook and can see how it works in with recipes they're considering or tones of their menu that already exist. And so next week, actually, I'm doing a cooking class at the International Culinary Center in New York. And my family also laughs at that because I'm admittedly not the best chef, but I do know a lot about bugs and their flavors. And so I work with those that can cook wonderfully to put some magic together.
Wow. Give us a recipe that you've used recently, if you could.
Yeah. Let's see. So I really, really like, I will pan-sear up some scorpion and tarantula, and it's pretty simple. It's just taking a dehydrated, partially, scorpion and putting that into a pan, olive oil, some lemon juice, some garlic, salt, and pepper, and just pan-sear it up. I'll put it on top of either some bruschetta or onto just a little bit of couscous, and that's pretty delicious. If I'm trying to be a little bit more creative, I make a lot of really good mixes with soaking mealworms or crickets into sesame oil or a soy sauce and letting them marinate for a little bit, and then getting some like fresh ricotta cheese and some basil and thyme and different herbs and putting in black ants as the peppery lemon element and mixing that together and making that into a little hors d'oeuvre with cracker or a nice little ant cheese mixture sprinkled on top with some savory marinated mealworms or crickets.
That actually,
yeah.
That actually sounds delicious.
Yes. So yeah, this is the part where it's like we're not asking everyone to eat bugs. Pardon?
What's that?
I was saying, we're not asking everyone to eat bugs. We'd like it if you wanted to, but there's plenty of other ways that these
course
guys
not.
can fit in.
Sure. Well, I've been fortunate to have spent enough time in Asia that it's part of the cuisine and a lot of cooking, and so it's not even that thought about. I remember the first time I tried a little bowl of crickets, deep fried crickets that were a bit like if you go into a pub here, you'd have pretzels or beer nuts, and it's a norm. All right, so Aly, let's think a little bit about Panama. You will be presenting to us. You'll actually be pitching us on the Entopian Fund, and you are going to treat our members and guests to a pairing of bugs and wine. So that leads me to ask the question of where do you start? Well, I'm hoping that you start with an entry point that is not too frightening for folks. So, but tell us, where do you typically start with your pairings? What bug do you choose, and what wine?
Yeah, so I try to emphasize you're in great hands. Like I've had I think 2 adults cry at events ever, but never any kids. So I feel like the adults had some emotional baggage there, some phobias. But we kind of start with a gateway bug. One thing I've saved you from on this podcast has been my horrible sense of humor. But the bug world is filled with bug puns. So we'll start off with I'm holding up here. It says eat bugs, and it's a bag of Chirps chips, and there's a cricket per chip, and you would not even know there's crickets in there if you weren't told. But some other buzzwords that work really well in Los Angeles are they're paleo and they're gluten-free and all those good things. So we'll start off with some chips, maybe some chocolates or some other kind of Trojan horse foods so that people can get used to the idea of eating bugs without seeing the bugs. And since those are chips and candies, there's not a very elegant pairing, but technically you do pair those types of products with oils with something with bubbles, because the bubbles lift the oils and help you get to the flavor itself a little bit more. So we'll do the party pairing and a nice little champagne or bubbly rosé with some snacks. And then we'll dive right into some of the more whole bugs.
Wow. Well, I think that we have something to look forward to, by all means. I certainly do. I love wine, and I love the pairings. I love the magic that happens when the foods with the right composition pairs up with wines, and you really do create magic in your mouth. And I look forward to it, and I'm sure our members and guests are going to look forward to it as well. What I'd like to close with is just giving a little guidance to our listeners that this is the Entopian Fund is something that fits very well with Obris and our parent of Crown Private in terms of the type of companies or funds that we invest in. That when we're working in the early stage sectors, we are very particular to choose entities that are going to make money, and in a shorter period of time than not. We certainly appreciate that you and your team have come together to not just corner a particular market, or not to corner a particular market within the growing insect industry, but you've actually put your talents and experience together to identify how do you actually make money off this, and how can we and our members and investors make money off this. So thank you very much for sharing this with us, and we will go into much more detail in Panama, and our members will certainly get a good grasp of how this is going to make them money in the near future. So Aly, thank you very much.
Thank you. Truly, this has been a wonderful opportunity.
If you're an investor and you were intrigued by my interview with Aly or the other investment topics we cover in the Global Investor Podcast, please consider joining us in Panama. We will be glad to have you as a guest at the event, and you'll have the opportunity to meet our remarkable group and to learn from the experts. Our members really are an amazing group of self-made and accomplished investors. They come from 15 countries and a wide variety of professions. We share the common pursuits of surrounding ourselves with great people in great places and gaining significant returns in investing. At the Panama event, we will cover a wide variety of topics that are important to investors today. We will also feast on the sights and sounds of Panama, amazing sunsets from rooftop bars, excursions to the canal and historic Panama City, plus great restaurants, shops, and clubs. Bottom line, if you have not been to an Obris event, this could be a game changer for you. You really have to experience Obris to fully grasp the value. So join us from July 15th to the 20th. We will be at the Le Méridien Hotel in Panama City. You can learn more about the event at obrisinvest.com/Panama 2019. That's obrisinvest.com/Panama 2019. Registration is underway. Thank you very much for joining me this week. See you in Panama.